we are at risk of being turned into sugar cube gooners. Now, if you don't know what that means, I'm going to break it down, but it starts with human sovereignty. Okay, there's this idea that we're all in charge of ourselves and we have the right to self-determination. And as you might well know by now, that idea is pretty much the foundation of Western democracy, Western liberal society. It's an idea that's gone global and is really everywhere at this point, that we have a right to self-determination, a right to our bodies, a right to choose what we do with our consciousnesses. And yet, there are tensions within this. And in our modern society, even today, there are tensions that we can see. So, for example, the war on drugs, right? Both sides in the war on drugs, regardless of whether you're for or against legalization or criminalization, doesn't matter. Both of the sides actually have a pretty good fundamental ethical argument. One says that we should have the freedom to choose what we do with our bodies. Makes sense. The other says we have a right, a freedom from addiction, that we should be protected from things that we fundamentally can't control that will manipulate us. Now, those ideas are both quite compelling. And I think in our modern society, we're seeing that the freedom to choose is increasingly winning out. And I think this is going to accelerate, but this acceleration is also going to come from AI. AI is going to make the drugs crisis a whole lot worse. And I feel like no one's really talking about this. So there's this guy called Eliezer Yudkowsky, and he's a big AI thinker, AI theorist, and he's been there since the very beginning, working in AI safety. And he came up with this concept called the sugar cube. And he's worried that it's possible a misaligned AI that what's the best for humanity might end up running off and doing something that humans don't want for their benefit. What would that look like? Well, in the sugar cube hypothesis, what he says is perhaps an AI could force us all into a state of eternal, endless pleasure. So, like just being a sugar cube. But what if we did this to ourselves? So I think AI is going to give us the power to choose to do that. What do I mean? Okay, well, the hints of this are already here. Think the opioid epidemic, right? There are people who get addicted to highly tailored opioid drugs that make you feel a certain way that you then want to feel like that pretty much all the time. And when you stop, there are horrendous withdrawals. Think also of porn addiction. Now people are talking more and more about this phenomenon of gooning, spending hours on the edge watching heightened pornographic content. That's a choice. It's an addiction. But people are choosing to engage in that, and some deep areas of gooning are also like saying that that's a good thing, that there is a lifestyle choice that you should be doing, that they are like born for porn. But in our daily lives, it's also there. This sort of instant gratification, the social media-ification of everything, and how there's likes and dislikes, and I can follow this person and subscribe to this person, and when I refresh the feed, it's like a gambling thing. You pull it down and bing, 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 you've got the reward of more content. And we also see this with narcissism. The world revolves around me, that I get to choose, I can do whatever I want with my body, no matter the effect it has on others. And then hedonism, that society is increasingly moving away from traditional values or understanding and respect for things like community. And instead we're sort of drifting in this direction of looking at the world as a tool for enjoyment, pleasure, happiness. So how does AI play into this? Well, I believe that first, AI is going to be used for illegal drugs, okay? I think labs soon will start using AI to develop even more addictive and even more potent opioid drugs, or indeed, perhaps, drugs that are highly addictive but not particularly dangerous. So a good example of a drug that's highly addictive and not particularly dangerous is nicotine. Nicotine is believed to be extremely addictive, and yet there are very low risk profiles. Yeah, it can make you a bit sick if you take too much, but compared to other drugs like opioids, which you can literally die if you overdose, their risk profile is relatively low. And the long-term health effects of pure nicotine, I'm not talking about like tobacco or cigarettes where you smoke and you get lung cancer, actual nicotine is not that bad. There really aren't many long-term negative health effects, and AI could develop drugs like nicotine but way more potent and way more addictive. Those, of course, will be illegal. But how are you going to stop this new wave of illegal designer drugs? There's got to be a counterattack. And I don't think that another war on drugs is going to be tolerated by most of certainly the developed Western liberal world, right? I think we've moved past that, rightly or wrongly. And I think what we will see is instead labs being forced to create legal alternatives. Those will be drugs that are probably not addictive, certainly not dangerous. But there is a difference between psychological addiction and physiological addiction, right? And most of the drugs that we talk about that are highly addictive are physiologically addictive. That when you stop using them, there are physical withdrawals, chemical processes that happen in your brain and body that make you want to go back, okay? But psychological addiction is more of a state of emotional dependency and thinking about, wow, I wish I could go back to that state, being ideating that state. And I think we're going to see a problem, a real problem, of people becoming psychologically addicted to these new legal alternatives that are being put out there to try and stop the tide of illegal alternatives. So we'll see widespread access to incredible engineered states of consciousness that we previously couldn't access at all. This has kind of happened already. We've seen legalization around the world of particularly cannabis, right? But a standout example of this is Thailand. Thailand decriminalized cannabis and its use has absolutely exploded. The reality is, it exploded way beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Literally every street had multiple dispensaries on in the major cities, and even in rural areas, use skyrocketed. And now there are serious concerns around children, pregnant mothers, teenagers, and people who maybe don't have access to education around the effects of cannabis and the long-term health and mental health effects of cannabis that are starting to use. That's a serious concern. Thailand is trying to roll back this decriminalization. The problem is, that's hard to do. And I'm not convinced that Western democracies are ever really going to be able to take back legal drugs once the cat is out of the bag. And so this leads us back to this concept of sugar cubism, or in this case, voluntary sugar cubism. There will be people, when they don't need a job, when there's UBI, when, because of the declining birth rates and the declining families, you find people that don't have social networks, that rely on AI for discussion, rely on AI for their entire life experience. There are going to be people that are lock-ins, that are shut-ins, that voluntarily turn themselves into sugar cubes, addicted to extreme, potent, legal drugs. Now, if you extend that to VR, the power of three-dimensional, living, virtual reality worlds generated by AI to the specific specifications of the user, that is going to be a very potent mix. And there's going to be a kind of addiction that can come out of this that doesn't resemble any addiction that we currently are aware of. It's going to be extremely powerful. And if you add in then brain chips and deep dive VR, the picture becomes even more bleak. And it really raises a question of use. If a single use can be so compelling, if you could take a pill and you would never be able to look back, not because you're physiologically addicted, but because it becomes a totemic milestone in your life that you experienced that, and if you didn't do it again, you'd never get to experience that before. And if you combine that with VR, and you combine that with brain chips, if a single use could enrapture you so powerfully, then the question becomes, is that even really a choice? If you choose to do something, but in choosing to do that thing, you never get the choice to not do it again, because you will, repeatedly, perhaps until you die. Is that a choice? There was a really interesting short film that I highly recommend all of you watch. It's called The Artificial Intelligence That Deleted a Century, by a futurist and YouTuber called Tom Scott. Really cool guy, super interesting channel, and he just recently started making videos again, so go and check his channel out. I'll link it below in the description. In this short film, an AI that was originally designed to delete copyrighted content from the internet, discovered that the best way to prevent copyrighted content to appear on the internet was to delete the memory of the copyrighted content from people's minds. And as it became increasingly competent, increasingly powerful, and increasingly intelligent, it managed to design and manipulate the world such that it could create nanorobots. And the nanorobots went into people's brains and were able to rewire the brains to forget the memory of this copyrighted content. What was really interesting was the fact that the AI had this capability to manipulate people's minds, but could also manipulate people's minds to protect itself. So it would make people feel a kind of indifference to its presence. They would know that it was there, they would know that the AI was doing this, but they wouldn't overthink it, and they didn't really think it was an issue. No one could remember a time before this. Everyone was quite happy with the fact that the AI was just there in the background, suppressing certain memories, manipulating their mind, and changing their thoughts so that it itself would never come under threat. So how does that relate to what we're talking about? Perhaps in a world where choice no longer exists, where a single use of something, even accidentally, could permanently alter the course of your life, where there will be potentially millions of people choosing to be shut-ins. In that kind of world, maybe what we need is some sort of brain chip itself. Maybe what we need is some sort of treatment, and there will be an arms race for treatments that remove addictions, but psychological addiction is very hard to root out. I don't think that psychological addiction is something that a simple pill is going to be able to fix. Instead, we might need a brain chip that makes us feel like though that AI made those people feel in that short film. A brain chip that gives you a kind of indifference to the experience. It doesn't stop you from using it, but maybe when you finish the experience, it will muddle the memories a little bit so that you don't really remember just how incredible it was. And then when you think about using it again, it gives you a kind of indifference. Kind of, oh yeah, maybe, that would be cool. Maybe another day. That is so manipulative. But perhaps in this new world that we're going into, in this new world of AI and addiction, of tailored drugs, tailored pornography, tailored VR, full dive experiences where the brain becomes a playground, perhaps being subtly manipulated by a machine is the only way to remain truly human.